The transport ship descended through the orange clouds of Verith 7, and Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez watched the alien moon grow larger through the viewport window beside her seat. She had spent 15 years in the military, fought in 3 wars on Earth, and trained soldiers who went on to become legends in their own right. But nothing could have prepared her for this moment when humanity would finally stand beside the stars. The Galactic Coalition had accepted Earth into their alliance just 18 months ago. And now the 47th Human Expeditionary Unit was about to set foot on an alien world for the first time in human history. Elena looked back at her team of 20 soldiers, who sat in silence behind her. Their faces calm, but their eyes sharp with anticipation. Among them sat Corporal David Reyes, a man of 32 years who rarely spoke more than 10 words in a day and who carried a rifle case that stretched longer than his own body. The ship landed with a gentle thud, and the rear doors opened to reveal a massive training facility carved into the rocky landscape of the moon. Hundreds of alien soldiers stood in formation across the landing zone, representing species that humanity had only learned about through diplomatic briefings and grainy photographs. The Voron Dominion soldiers stood tallest among them, their blue-scaled bodies covered in sleek armor that hummed with energy, and their 4 eyes watching the humans with obvious disdain. Beside them waited the Cathari, insectoid warriors with razor-sharp limbs and exoskeletons that could stop a knife blade, their antennae twitching as they studied the newcomers. The crystalline Oreth floated nearby, their bodies made of living mineral that refracted light in rainbow patterns, communicating through pulses of color that rippled across their forms. Elena led her team down the ramp and onto the alien soil, her boots crunching against the gravel as she approached the welcoming committee commander. Desal of the Voron Dominion stepped forward, his rank displayed by the golden bands wrapped around his upper arms and the energy sword that hung from his belt. "So these are the famous humans," he said, his voice deep and rumbling like distant thunder. Translated instantly by the device clipped to Elena's ear. "We have heard much about your species and your recent expansion into space, and we were curious to see what kind of warriors Earth would send to represent them." He walked slowly along the line of human soldiers, his 4 eyes examining each one with the look of someone inspecting cattle at a market. When he reached Reyes, he stopped and stared at the long rifle case strapped to the corporal's back. "What is this weapon you carry?" "Human," Dexal asked, genuine confusion crossing his alien features. Reyes said nothing, so Elena answered for him. "That is a precision rifle, Commander, designed for long-range engagement." Dexal made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter, a harsh barking noise that echoed across the landing zone. "A projectile weapon," he announced loudly so that all the gathered aliens could hear. The humans still use projectile weapons. The reaction was immediate and humiliating. The Cathari clicked their mandibles in what passed for mockery among their kind, while the Orth flashed bright yellow pulses that their translator identified as amusement. Even the support staff and technicians working around the landing zone stopped to stare at the humans with pity in their alien eyes. "Tell me, Sergeant Major," Dexal continued, clearly enjoying himself, "do your soldiers also carry spears and stone axes? Or have you at least advanced beyond the throwing of rocks at your enemies?" Elena felt her jaw tighten, but she forced her expression to remain neutral and professional. "Our weapons may seem simple to you, Commander, but they have served humanity well for many centuries." "Simple," Dexal repeated with another bark of laughter. "That is a generous word for what you carry." He gestured toward his own soldiers, and several of them raised their weapons to display them proudly. "These are plasma rifles, capable of burning through 3 meters of reinforced steel with a single shot. And these are particle disruptors that can reduce a living being to atoms in less than a second." He pointed at the energy shields that shimmered around each Voron soldier like soap bubbles made of light. Our shields can absorb and redirect any energy weapon known to the Coalition. And our armor is woven with nanomaterials that can repair damage in real time. Dexal stepped closer to Elena, towering over her by nearly a full meter. And what do you bring to this alliance, human? Metal tubes that spit out tiny pieces of lead at speeds that our shields register as minor inconveniences. Elena met his four-eyed gaze without flinching. We bring what has kept humanity alive for 1,000,000 years. Commander, the ability to adapt and overcome. Dexal dismissed her words with a wave of his clawed hand. Pretty words. But words do not win battles, and neither do museum relics disguised as weapons. He turned to address the entire assembly. Let it be known that the humans are welcome here as observers. But I would advise the other species not to rely on them when real combat training begins tomorrow. The aliens dispersed, many of them casting amused glances at the human soldiers as they walked away to their barracks. Elena led her team to the quarters assigned to them. A small building at the far edge of the facility that looked like it had been hastily constructed just for their arrival. Once inside with the door sealed behind them, she finally allowed herself to exhale. Well, said Lieutenant Torres, her second in command, that could have gone better. They will learn, Elena replied, her voice calm but carrying an edge of steel beneath the surface. She looked at Reyes, who had already begun unpacking his rifle case with the careful attention of a surgeon preparing for an operation. The weapon inside was a thing of brutal beauty, all matte black metal and precision engineering, designed for one purpose and one purpose only. Corporal Reyes, Elena said, and the quiet man looked up at her with those cold gray eyes that had earned him the nickname Ghost back on Earth. Yes, Sergeant Major. Tomorrow they begin war games across the canyon system, and we have been assigned to the defensive team against the combined alien assault force. Reyes nodded slowly, his hands still moving across his rifle with practiced familiarity. How far are the canyons, Sergeant Major? Elena pulled up the tactical map on her wrist display and studied the terrain. The main approach runs through a valley approximately 2.5 kilometers long, for the first time since they had landed. Something that might have been a smile crossed Reyes's face. That will do nicely. One of the younger soldiers, Private Chen, looked confused. 2.5 kilometers, Corporal. Can you really shoot that far? Reyes did not answer the question directly, but instead finished assembling his rifle and looked through the scope at the far wall of the barracks, as if seeing something none of them could perceive. The commander asked what my weapon does, he said quietly. It reaches out and touches someone from very far away, and they never see it coming. Elena watched her sniper with something approaching pride. Tomorrow the aliens would learn a lesson that humanity had taught to every predator and every enemy throughout their long and bloody history. Distance meant nothing to a species that had learned to kill from beyond the horizon. The Galactic Coalition believed that advanced technology made them untouchable, but they had never faced an enemy who had perfected the art of patient, invisible death. Tomorrow, Corporal David Reyes would teach them what human weapons could really do. The sun rose over the canyons of Verith 7 like a ball of molten copper, casting long shadows across the jagged rocks and deep valleys that would serve as the battlefield for the day's war. Elena stood at the edge of a cliff overlooking the terrain, her tactical display mapping every ridge and every crevice while her mind worked through the possibilities. The Coalition commanders had assigned the humans to a small, defensive position deep in the canyon system, a rocky outcrop with limited cover. And even less tactical advantage, it was obvious to everyone that the humans had been given this position because the aliens expected them to fail quickly and spectacularly. The assault force arrayed against them was overwhelming in both numbers and firepower. Commander Dexal had personally taken command of the attack. leading a combined force of 50 Vorn heavy infantry, 30 Kethari scout warriors, and 20 Arath support units. Their objective was simple: capture the human command post within 6 hours. The aliens had energy weapons that could vaporize stone, shields that could stop artillery rounds, and sensors that could detect a heartbeat from 500 meters away by every logical calculation. The humans should surrender before the first shot was even fired. Lieutenant Torres approached Elena with a datapad showing the enemy force disposition. They are not even trying to hide their movements. Sergeant Major, she said with frustration in her voice. They think this will be over in minutes. Good, Elena replied. Overconfidence is the first step toward defeat. She turned to face her assembled team. 20 soldiers who looked back at her with trust in their eyes, despite the impossible odds they faced. Listen carefully, because I will only explain this once. She pulled up a holographic map of the canyon system and began pointing at key locations. The aliens have superior technology in almost every measurable way. But technology has weaknesses that can be exploited by those who know where to look. She zoomed in on a narrow passage that served as the main approach to their position. Their plasma weapons and particle beams leave massive energy signatures when fired, which means their sensors are calibrated to detect those same signatures from enemy weapons. Torres nodded slowly as understanding began to dawn on her face. But our weapons do not use energy. Exactly. Elena confirmed. Our rifles fire metal projectiles using chemical propellants, which produces almost zero detectable signature on their standard sensor arrays. She pointed to the ridgelines on either side of the approach. Their shields are designed to absorb and redirect energy. But a physical projectile traveling at supersonic speeds operates on completely different principles. Private Chun raised his hand. Will our bullets even penetrate their shields? Sergeant Major, Elena smiled for the first time since they had arrived on this alien moon. That is what we are going to find out. But I have done the calculations, and their shields are not designed to stop kinetic impacts at the velocities our weapons can achieve. She turned to Reyes, who had been standing apart from the group, studying the distant terrain through a pair of high-powered binoculars. Corporal, what do you see? Reyes lowered the binoculars and pointed toward a rocky outcrop, barely visible on the horizon. There is a position approximately 2.3 kilometers from the main approach, elevated 70 meters above the canyon floor, with clear sight lines to the entire assault corridor. Can you make shots at that range? Reyes considered the question for a moment, his eyes scanning the sky to judge the wind and the atmosphere. The air here is thinner than Earth, which means less drag on the bullet and flatter trajectories, and the gravity is slightly lower, which will affect drop calculations. He paused and performed some mental mathematics that would have taken a computer several seconds to complete. Yes, Sergeant Major, I can make those shots. Elena nodded and began assigning positions to the rest of her team. The other soldiers would hold the main defensive line and create the appearance of a conventional engagement while Reyes worked his particular brand of magic from the shadows. She assigned Torres to coordinate communications and jamming operations, ensuring that the aliens could not call for orbital support. When things began to go wrong for them, Private Chun and 3 others would man the choke points with suppressive fire, keeping enemy heads down while Reyes identified and eliminated high-value targets. The plan was simple in concept, but would require perfect execution. One more thing, Elena said as her team prepared to move to their positions. The aliens are recording everything for their training archives, which means the entire coalition will eventually see what happens here today. She looked each of her soldiers in the eye. Today we show them what humanity is capable of. Today we prove that we belong among the stars. And today we make them remember the name of Earth. The soldiers responded with quiet determination rather than cheers. Professionals who understood that action spoke louder than words ever could raise, gathered his equipment and began the long trek to his distant position, moving through the rocks like a ghost, leaving no trace of his passage. He carried his rifle, 40 rounds of ammunition, a water bottle, and nothing else. A sniper needed patience more than supplies. And Reyes had patience that bordered on the supernatural. He reached his position an hour before the war games were scheduled to begin, and immediately began the careful work of preparation. He measured the wind speed and direction at multiple points along his potential. Firing lines, he calculated the exact distance to dozens of landmarks that the enemy might pass. He built a small hide from local rocks and vegetation that would render him invisible to both eyes and sensors by the time the coalition commanders announced the start of the exercise. Reyes had become part of the landscape itself, far below in the canyon approach. The alien assault force began their advance with the confidence of predators who had never faced a worthy opponent. Commander Dexal led from the front, his energy shield glowing bright blue around his armored form, his 4 eyes scanning ahead for threats that he was certain would never materialize. Beside him walked his second in command, a Vorn veteran named Krethos, who had fought in a dozen campaigns across the galaxy. Behind them marched the combined might of 3 spacefaring civilizations, armed with weapons that could crack open battleships and shields that had never been breached in combat. Their sensors showed the human position clearly. A small cluster of life signs huddled behind inadequate cover with weapons that registered as barely worth noticing. "This will be over quickly," Dexal announced to his forces over their communication network. "The humans have no chance against our superior technology and numbers." The Kethari scouts chittered in agreement while the Orath pulsed confirmation. In shades of confident gold, none of them noticed the tiny glint of light on the distant ridge where Corporal David Reyes lay perfectly still, his eye pressed to his scope and his finger resting gently on the trigger. The crosshairs settled on Krethos, and Reyes exhaled slowly, emptying his lungs to steady his aim. The first lesson was about to begin. The bullet left the barrel of Reyes's rifle at a velocity of 900 meters per second, spinning through the thin air of Vareth 7 like a tiny messenger of death. Krethos never saw it coming. One moment, he was walking beside Commander Dexal, discussing their strategy for overwhelming the human position, and the next moment a hole the size of a fist appeared in his chest. Where his heart used to be, his energy shield flickered once and then died. Designed to stop plasma bolts and particle beams, but utterly unprepared for a chunk of metal moving faster than sound. The boom of the rifle shot reached the canyon floor 2.5 seconds later. A deep thunderous crack that echoed off the rock walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Dexal stared at the body of his fallen comrade in complete disbelief. "What happened?" he demanded, his 4 eyes darting in every direction, searching for the threat. "Report." What weapon was that? His tactical officers scrambled to provide answers, their sensors sweeping the area for any sign of enemy fire. "Unknown, Commander," one of them replied with obvious confusion in his voice. "We detected no energy discharge, no targeting laser, no weapon signature of any kind." "That is impossible," Dexal snarled. "Weapons do not fire themselves. Find the source immediately." Before anyone could respond, another shot rang out across the canyon. A Kethari squad leader collapsed with his head simply gone, the high-velocity round having passed through his exoskeleton like it was made of. Paper panic began to ripple through the alien ranks. These were warriors who had faced plasma bombardments and orbital strikes without flinching, but this was something different. Something their training had never prepared them for. Death was coming from nowhere, striking without warning. And their advanced technology could not even identify the threat. "Spread out," Vexal commanded, trying to regain control of the situation. "Do not present clustered targets, and advance toward the human position at maximum speed." The aliens scattered across the canyon floor, their shields raised and their weapons ready to return fire against an enemy they could not see. Ace watched them through his scope with the cold patience of a predator who knew his prey could not escape. He had already reloaded and selected his next target, a Vorn officer who was shouting orders and trying to organize a defensive formation. De vivo crosshairs settled on the officer's throat, just above where his armor met his helmet, and Reyes squeezed the trigger with the gentle precision of a surgeon making an incision. Another boom echoed through the canyon, and another alien fell down at the main defensive position. Elena watched the chaos unfold through her binoculars with grim satisfaction. The aliens were running now, abandoning their careful formation in favor of raw survival. But they were running in exactly the wrong direction. "Torres, begin jamming their communications," she ordered. "I want them isolated and confused." "Already on it, Sergeant Major," Torres replied, her fingers dancing across her equipment. "They will not be calling for help anytime soon." The Arath attempted to signal for orbital support, their crystalline bodies flashing urgent red patterns toward the sky. But the jamming field scrambled their light-based communications into meaningless noise for the first time in their long history as a spacefaring species. The Orath experienced true fear. Rays continued his methodical work, selecting targets based on rank and tactical importance. Every officer who tried to rally their troops caught a bullet within seconds. Every communication specialist who attempted to restore contact with command headquarters met the same fate. The aliens began to understand a terrible truth. Someone was watching them from a distance they could not comprehend, picking them off one by one with perfect accuracy. "Find that sniper," Vexal screamed into his communicator. The only static answered him. "I want every scanner focused on the ridgelines." His remaining tactical officers complied, directing their sensors toward the surrounding cliffs and outcrops in a desperate search for the hidden killer. The sensors found nothing. They were calibrated for energy signatures and heat, blooms and electronic emissions. But Reyes produced none of these things. His rifle was mechanical, his camouflage was natural, and his body temperature was hidden beneath a thermal blanket that made him invisible to infrared detection to the alien sensors. He simply did not exist. Another shot, another dead Vorn. And Vexal finally realized the horrible scope of his mistake. He had mocked the human weapons as primitive, laughed at their simple metal tubes and chemical propellants. But those same simple weapons were now slaughtering his forces with impunity. The humans had not brought inferior technology to this battle. They had brought a completely different kind of warfare, one that his people had no defense against. "Retreat," he ordered, abandoning all pretense of command authority. "Fall back to the staging area." But the retreat only made things worse. The aliens had to move through the same canyon corridor they had used to advance, and Reyes had anticipated exactly this response. He had already relocated to a secondary position that covered the retreat route. And now he began his work again with mechanical efficiency. The Cathari, normally the fastest creatures in the coalition military, sent their best scouts racing toward the distant ridge to hunt. The sniper rays killed them before they covered half the distance, dropping them one after another like targets in a shooting gallery. One scout managed to get within 800 meters before a bullet caught him mid-leap, his insectoid body tumbling across the rocks in a spray of green ichor. The message was clear. There was no closing the distance, no reaching the human killer, no escape from his invisible reach. Al found himself pressed against a boulder, his mighty energy shield raised above his head like a child hiding under blankets from monsters in the dark. His force had begun the exercise with over 100 warriors. 30 minutes later, more than half of his officers were dead, and the rest were scattered and terrified. He had never experienced defeat like this. He had never even imagined that defeat like this was possible, through the chaos and the fear. One thought kept repeating in his mind. The humans were supposed to be weak. The humans were supposed to be primitive. The humans were supposed to be easy, but there was nothing weak about the ghost in the Faost. In the rocks who killed from beyond the horizon there was nothing primitive about a weapon that could reach out across kilometers and punch through shields, that had stopped plasma cannons, and there was nothing easy about fighting an enemy you could not see, could not detect, and could not understand. Finally spotted a glint of light on a distant ridge, a tiny reflection that lasted only a fraction of a second before disappearing. The sniper was there, more than 2 kilometers away, in a position that his people would have considered far outside of combat range. But for the humans, apparently, that distance was nothing more than a comfortable working environment. The commander realized something that chilled his blood. Despite the heat of the alien sun, if humanity ever became an enemy of the coalition instead of an ally, there would be no war, there would only be extermination, carried out by patient killers who struck from distances beyond comprehension. Another shot rang out, and another of his soldiers fell. Thexel closed all 4 of his eyes and began to pray to gods he had not believed in since childhood. Commander Thexal crouched behind his boulder and tried to think through the fear that clouded his mind like a poison fog all around him. The remnants of his once proud assault force huddled in whatever cover they could find, their advanced weapons useless against an enemy they could not locate. The Cathari had lost their entire scout detachment, their fastest and most skilled warriors killed before they could even identify the direction of the threat. The Orath had dimmed their colors to near black, their crystalline bodies trembling with an emotion that their species had not felt in 10,000 years of galactic dominance. And the Vorn, his own people, the conquerors of 100 worlds, cowered like frightened prey animals waiting for the predator to finish them off. This cannot be happening, Thexal muttered to himself. This cannot be real. But the bodies of his fallen comrades scattered across the canyon floor proved that it was very real indeed. His tactical display showed the grim statistics: 47 warriors dead or incapacitated, all command-level officers eliminated, communications completely jammed, and 0 confirmed hits on any human target. The exercise had been running for less than 2 hours, and his force had been utterly destroyed by what appeared to be a single shooter, a single human with a metal tube that threw pieces of lead. The irony was not lost on him, and he would have laughed if he was not so terrified. One of his surviving lieutenants crawled over to his position, keeping as low as possible to avoid drawing the sniper's attention. "Commander, what are your orders?" the young officer asked, his voice shaking despite his attempts to remain professional. Fix looked at the lieutenant and saw his own fear reflected in those 4 young eyes. "I do not know," he admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Our shields are useless, our sensors are blind, and our weapons cannot reach an enemy we cannot find." He gestured toward the distant ridge where he had seen that brief glint of light. "The human is out there, more than 2 kilometers away, and he has killed nearly half of our force without taking a single shot in return." The lieutenant's scales paled to a sickly gray color. 2 kilometers. "Commander, that is impossible. No infantry weapon has that kind of effective range. And yet here we are," Thexal replied bitterly, "dying to an impossible weapon wielded by a species we dismissed as primitive." He made a decision then, one that went against every instinct of his warrior culture, but that seemed like the only option remaining. We must reach the human lines directly, he announced. If we stay here, we die one by one. But if we charge their position, we might at least take some of them with us. It was not much of a plan, but it was better than waiting to be picked off like helpless targets. Dexol gathered his remaining warriors, now numbering fewer than 30, and prepared for one final desperate assault. For the honor of the Vorn Dominion, he shouted. Rising from his cover and activating his energy sword, charge! The aliens surged forward across the rocky terrain, their shields blazing and their weapons firing wildly toward the human defensive position. They covered 100 meters before the sniper responded. Reyes had been waiting for exactly this moment. Knowing that a cornered enemy would eventually attempt something, desperate, he tracked Dexol through his scope but held his fire, instead targeting the warriors on either side of the commander. Left, right, center, left again. Each shot dropping another alien and narrowing the charge into a funnel of death. The aliens fell screaming, their superior technology offering no protection against bullets that punched through their shields like needles through cloth. Kisil kept running, his legs pumping harder than they ever had in his life. His energy sword held high as he closed the distance to the human lines. 300 meters, 200 meters, 100 meters. Could see them now. The human soldiers crouched behind their simple barricades with their primitive weapons raised and ready. And then Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez stepped out from behind cover and raised her sidearm directly at his face. That is close enough, Commander, she said calmly, her voice carrying across the battlefield with perfect clarity. Thor stopped, his chest heaving and his sword arm trembling with exhaustion and rage behind him. The survivors of his charge lay scattered across the canyon floor, dead or dying, while Reyes's rifle continued to boom in the distance, finishing off any who still moved. How? Dexol demanded, the word coming out as a desperate plea more than a question. How did you do this? Elena lowered her weapon slightly but kept it aimed in his general direction. You asked yesterday what humans bring to this alliance, she said. Now you have your answer. She gestured toward the carnage behind him. We bring 1,000,000 years of evolution as persistence predators. Hunters who learn to kill from distances our prey could not comprehend long before we ever built our first cities. Dexol stared at her with dawning horror as she continued. Your species evolved with claws and fangs and natural armor, which meant you developed weapons that enhanced those advantages. Bigger claws, sharper fangs, stronger armor. She smiled, and there was something ancient and terrible in that expression. But humans have none of those things. And so we developed something different. The ability to reach out across impossible distances and kill without ever being seen. She pointed toward the distant ridge where Reyes lay hidden. That man out there has been shooting your officers from more than 2 kilometers away, adjusting for wind and gravity and atmospheric pressure with nothing but his own mind. And he could keep doing it all day without ever being detected by your sensors. Dexol's sword arm dropped to his side, the weapon suddenly feeling absurdly inadequate. Our shields, he whispered. Our shields should have stopped. Your shields are designed to absorb energy, Elena interrupted. But our bullets are not energy. They are simple matter moving very fast. And your shields have no protocol for stopping that kind of threat. She holstered her sidearm and took a step toward him. The Galactic Coalition has spent millennia developing more and more powerful energy weapons. More sophisticated shields, more advanced sensors. But you forgot a basic truth that humanity learned in our caves before we even discovered fire. Dexol looked into her eyes and saw no mercy there. Only the cold calculation of a predator who had already won. What truth? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. That the most dangerous weapon is not the one with the most power, Elena replied. It is the one your enemy does not know how to fight. Behind her, Reyes's voice crackled through the communication system. Target is still Sergeant Major. Waiting for your call. Vexall realized with sudden clarity that the sniper had him in his sights right now. Had probably had him in his sights for the entire conversation, one word from Elena, and his head would explode just like Kratos' chest had exploded at the start of this nightmare. The commander of the Vorn Assault Force, the veteran of 12 campaigns, the warrior who had laughed at human weapons just yesterday, dropped his energy sword to the ground and raised his hands in surrender. I yield, he said. The words causing physical pain as they left his mouth. Elena nodded once, her expression showing neither triumph nor contempt. Wise choice. Commander, she keyed her communicator. All units, cease fire. The exercise is over. The guns fell silent, and Vexall looked around at the devastation that a handful of humans had caused with nothing but patience and metal and the ancient art of killing from afar. He understood now why the universe should fear these strange soft creatures from the small blue world called Earth. They did not fight like civilized species. They fought like nightmares made flesh, invisible and patient and utterly without mercy. The Coalition Council chamber fell, absolutely silent as the holographic recording finished. Playing 200 representatives from across the galaxy had just watched a single human soldier systematically dismantle an assault force that should have been unstoppable. The footage showed everything. The first impossible shot that killed Kratos from 2.5 kilometers away. The methodical elimination of every officer and specialist in the alien ranks. And the final humiliating surrender of Commander Vexall when the lights came back on. Nobody spoke for a very long time. The Vorn ambassador sat with his head bowed, unable to meet the eyes of his colleagues. The Kethari delegation had gone completely still, their antennae drooping in a display of shock that their species rarely showed, even the Orth. Beings of pure crystal who claimed to be beyond primitive emotions, flickered with dim purple light that indicated deep unease. Finally, the elder counselor of the assembly, a being of vast age and experience named Verthax, rose from his chair and addressed the room. Let the record show that the human Expeditionary Force achieved complete victory in the war games with 0 casualties, he announced, his voice heavy with something that might have been awe. The Coalition Assault Force suffered 83% losses, with all command personnel eliminated. He turned to face the human delegation, who sat in their modest seats at the edge of the chamber. We owe you an explanation and an apology. Sergeant Major Elena Vasquez stood and accepted the counselor's words with a simple nod. No apology is necessary. Elder Verthax, we came here to demonstrate what humanity could contribute to the coalition, and I believe we have done so. A Kethari general clicked his mandibles and rose to speak. The soldier in the recording, the one who made those shots, we have analyzed his performance and consulted with our finest marksmen, and none of them can explain how such accuracy is possible at those ranges. Corporal Reyes is one of our best, Elena replied. But he is not unique among humans. We have thousands of snipers who can perform similar feats, and our training programs produce more every year. The chamber buzzed with alarmed whispers at this revelation. Thousands, the Kethari general repeated. You have thousands of warriors who can kill from beyond our sensor range. Yes, the simple answer hung in the air like a threat, though Elena had not meant it as. One of Orthax raised a hand to quiet the murmuring. We have spent this entire week reviewing the footage from multiple angles and consulting our military scientists about the implications, he said, and we have reached several conclusions that I will now share with the Council. He activated a display that showed a technical breakdown of Reyes's rifle and ammunition. Human projectile weapons operate on principles that our defensive technology was never designed to counter. Our shields absorb energy, but allow matter to pass through. Our sensors detect electromagnetic signatures, but ignore simple kinetic objects. And our tactics assume that effective combat range is limited by the speed of light delay of energy weapons. He paused to let this sink in. The humans have none of these limitations. Their weapons require no energy source, produce no detectable signature, and can reach targets at distances we considered impossible for infantry engagement. An Orath representative pulsed a question in bright white. Are you suggesting that our entire defensive doctrine is obsolete against these primitive weapons? Not obsolete, Verthax replied carefully, but certainly incomplete. And we have the humans to thank for revealing this gap in our capabilities before an actual enemy could exploit it. Commander Dexal stood from his seat in the Vorn section of the chamber. He had been silent throughout the session, his 4 eyes fixed on the floor. But now he looked directly at Elena with something new in his expression. Sergeant Major Vasquez. I mocked your weapons and your people when you first arrived, he said. I called your rifles museum pieces and questioned why you still threw rocks at your enemies. He walked down the steps of the chamber until he stood before her. I was a fool, and my arrogance cost the lives of good warriors who trusted me to lead them wisely. Elena met his gaze without flinching. Your warriors are not dead. Commander, this was an exercise, and the ammunition was non-lethal. But they could have been, Dexal replied. If this had been real combat, every single one of them would have died. And I would have led them to their deaths because I was too proud to take your people seriously. He extended one clawed hand in the gesture that the Vorn used to show respect. I am sorry, and I would be honored if you would forgive my ignorance. Elena took his hand and shook it firmly. There is nothing to forgive. Commander, you learned a lesson today, and wisdom gained through humility is the most valuable kind. The chamber watched this exchange with quiet respect, and when it was finished, Verthax spoke again. The Coalition Council has decided to formally request that humanity establish a training program to share your precision warfare techniques with member species. He smiled, an expression that looked strange on his ancient face. We call it the Sniper Exchange Initiative, and we hope that Earth will accept. Elena looked back at her team, at Rias, who sat silent and still as always, at Torres, who was trying not to grin, a young Private Chun who looked like he might burst with pride. We accept, she said. Humanity is honored to share what we know. The council session ended shortly after, and the human delegation made their way back to their quarters to prepare for the journey home along the way. Alien soldiers and civilians stopped to watch them pass, and the looks they received were very different from the contemptuous glances of a week ago. Now there was respect in those alien eyes, and perhaps a little fear as well. A young Cathari soldier approached Reyes as they walked and matched his pace with obvious nervousness. Corporal, may I ask you a question? Reyes glanced at the insectoid warrior, but did not slow his stride. Ask. What is the most dangerous part of a human sniper? Is it the weapon, the training, the patience? Reyes considered the question for a long moment, his gray eyes distant and cold. None of those things, he finally replied. Then what is it? Reyes stopped walking and turned to face the young alien. The most dangerous part of a human sniper is that you will never know we are there until you are already dead. The Cathari's antennae trembled. That is terrifying. Yes, Reyes agreed. It is supposed to be. He resumed walking, leaving the stunned alien behind, and Elena fell into step beside him. You enjoyed that, she said quietly. I do not know what you mean, Sergeant Major, but there was something in his voice that might have been amusement. The closest thing to humor that the ghost-quiet sniper ever showed. They boarded their transport ship and settled into their seats for the long journey back to Earth as the vessel rose through the orange clouds of Vareth 7. Elena looked out the viewport at the alien moon that had been their proving ground. Humanity had come to the stars as newcomers. dismissed and mocked by civilizations that had been exploring the galaxy for millennia before. Humans even invented the wheel, but today they had proven that age and technology were not everything. Sometimes the old ways were the best ways, and sometimes a simple weapon, wielded with patience and skill, could humble the mightiest empires in the universe. The Galactic Coalition would never underestimate Earth again, and somewhere in the vast darkness of space, other powers were surely watching and taking notes, learning the same lesson that Dexal had learned in the canyons of Vareth 7. Humanity was not primitive, humanity was not weak, humanity was simply different. And that difference made them more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. Elena smiled and closed her eyes as the transport ship jumped to faster than light speed. It was good to be human.